Hello, Charlie TCG here, and welcome back to another Retro First Stage. Today we're throwing it all the way back to 2000s, the furthest I've gone back so far, looking at base set Team Rocket. The first time a huge Pokemon tournament did happen, kind of breaking down exactly what happened and the results in this sort of era. Looking at the key archetypes, where kind of there was lots of hand control and trainer lock kind of going on there, which was really impactful to kind of how the format kind of developed, as well as obviously looking at those key cards and archetypes kind of dominated this sort of fun retro style format. So if you're new, be sure to like and subscribe. Don't forget to join to find out when my new content comes out. So without further ado, let's see exactly what was legal in this time. Well, there were 4 sets. I don't know really what people were really expecting. We had the base set, Jungle, Fossil, and Team Rocket. Very for all the way back to the early sort of stages of Pokemon. There weren't a load of stuff kind of going around in this sort of era, so that's why it was so interesting that there were quite a few, but there was a big sort of tournament. So that's exactly what happened in this format. There's only one mass tournament where 1,000 players over all ages were able to go there. It was also happening on a boat, so very much like SSN, which I found was quite funny, called the Showdown. But unfortunately, Pokemon didn't expect as many people to turn up. 6,000 people turned up with only 1,000 slots. So that was a big problem. So only 1,000 people may actually go in and compete. And they also add this easier training lock in this sort of format, instead of relying too much on Psyduck. We had the introduction of Vileplume, and obviously is very much irritating pollen, and it's a huge ability lock that kind of went around with that, and training lock, sorry, and obviously some more disruption cards as well, like Team Rocket's admin, which we're going to kind of like break down in further detail. So what were these course of set cards? I thought I'd kind of showcase exactly what are these cards before we kind of go into the format. I know we like to go straight into seeing exactly what breakdown is, but I thought I'd kind of introduce to you exactly what these cards and what these were, because we're in a very different sort of time here, where stage 2s had 60 to 80 HP, and that was considered high. So Dark Vileplume here with their Hay Fever, where no trainer cards can be played. Obviously, it gets shut off, with Poke Powers do if they're affected by special condition. Now, trainer cards, it's saying this, not item cards, or like what I talked about last week, where it was trainer cards except supporters. No, back then, everything was a trainer card. Supporters, stadium, tool cards, and items all under the same bracket as trainer cards. So shutting off pretty much 50% of a deck already is insanely strong, and that's exactly what this card really brought to the format. We just have this Mewtwo in here, which is very powerful. It was a movie promo and had quite a few sort of archetype and looks into it, but use that energy absorption where you get to choose up to 2 basic energy cards from your discard pile and attach them to Mewtwo. Kind of very good, because then you can kind of power up with Psybeam. It's a really good sort of synergy. Kind of kept them discarding there with the likes of Professor Oak, and then you can immediately put them back on with energy absorb. Now on to my favorite archetype as well, which I love, is Wigglytuff with the Do the Wave. Yes, 3 energies, 10 damage plus 10 more for each of your benched Pokemon. So in theory, you're doing 60 damage for 3. And that seems quite good when you're pretty much two-shotting a lot of the format, and you can have the likes of obviously plus power to do more damage. I like this as well, but there are the likes of a thing called Haymaker, which has the likes of basic Pokemon which have little energy and can do high damage output. With the likes of Hitmonchan, for a 1 energy, it does 20 damage. That seems very strong, especially if you team up against Wigglytuff. Doing 40 damage is very good. I believe weakness back then was plus 20. I always forget where the weakness was back in this sort of era. Then Special Punch, 2 fighting and the colors, 40 damage. Yes, with that's what we're on in this format. You're seeing how little damage things are doing. That's pretty much what happened over in Pokemon. That's why these sort of basic and evolved Pokemon kind of did take a long time to get set up, because you had the likes of these very interesting, powerful cards. Sorry, it's Rocket Sneak Attack, which is you look at your opponent's hand, and if they have a trainer card in there, they get to choose one and shuffle that into their deck. This is pretty much more strong and more powerful, because you could team up with a Lass, where you and your opponent show each other your hands and then shuffle all trainer cards back into it. So this is kind of like more disruptive sort of routes in there. Kind of want to kind of like potentially even clog up your opponent's hand by doing like potentially spamming like 4 Team Rocket sneak attacks turn 1, which you can do because there's no rule about supporter turn 1, and then going that sort of route to kind of like constantly be dealing this huge amount of damage that sort of way, by kind of like making sure they don't do any setup as much as possible. Same thing with Lass, is very disruptive, kind of like disrupting the opponent by not getting the likes of Computer Search, where you could play 4 of these, which you get to discard 2 cards and search deck for a card. Pretty much, it is exactly what you're thinking. It is pretty much the A-Spec was a reprint of this sort of archetype, and Computer Search was incredibly powerful because it was used in so many archetypes. And Super Energy Removal, discard one energy attached to one of your own Pokemon in play if you do choose one of your opponent's Pokemon, and discard up to 2 energies attached to it. Yes, very, very disgusting energy disruption where you just get rid of one and they get rid of 2. It's going to be really powerful. Sorry about that. Really, really powerful because you can shut down the opponent's pretty much the whole board state as well. So you can kind of see there's a lot of disruptive, a lot more probably more control than people really give it credit back in the old days, where control and item lock or trainer lock was really kind of dominating in this sort of format. So let's look at the 2000 CA Super Trainer Showdown result. This was the 1,000 player tournament, and what won was a deck called Sponge, which you pretty much can hit loads of damage and you kind of like some tanks and sort of attacks, and having the likes of Ditto and Mewtwo and other sort of like Haymaker sort of cards like Hitmonchan and Lickitung as well as Pfeiffer to really kind of like help sort of do some more damage. Do the Wave did in fact get second place, my favorite archetype, and then the likes of Active Stall, which is pretty much a way to use like Haymaker, I mean the likes of Magmar to really kind of like stall out the opponent, kind of like pretty much making sure that they can't do any attacks. And having the likes of Haymaker did in fact get top 4 place as well. And the rest of top 8 was a Wigglytuff sort of deck, Magmar, Hitmonchan, and another Do the Wave. So Wigglytuff definitely kind of popping out quite a lot more regularly than you think. And I generally think it was such a fun archetype and generally a deck which I absolutely adore. So let's see exactly what does a base set deck look like. So like I mentioned, this is this absorb sort of sponge sort of deck here. I mentioned a lot about what Mewtwo and Hitmonchan does, but having the likes of Lickitung is on a coin flip, the opponent's active Pokemon is now paralyzed. Not too bad because you also have Supersonic, which on a coin flip, the opponent is now confused. So this is very powerful to kind of like disrupt the opponent as much as possible. You can have the likes of Gust of Wind, which is a gusting card, pretty much as Pokemon capture. And kind of like bring out a Pokemon in there, kind of like gust them and making sure they can't use any of their Poke powers. Cypher is one of the other sort of archetypes which is similar to Hitmonchan and Electabuzz, which Electabuzz kind of like loses a bit of its favor in these Haymaker style decks. With Sword Dance, which pretty much your attacks does 60 base instead of 30, and then Slash does 60 damage instead of 30 damage. This is powerful when you can team up with double colors and an energy attachment. You can get this powered up very, very quickly. You also have the likes of Mew and Ditto. Ditto has a very interesting transformation where pretty much it is whatever the opponent's active Pokemon is. It transforms into that, both hit points and weakness as well, except Ditto can't evolve and it always has its Poke power, and treat any energy attached to Ditto as any type. So very, very powerful, pretty much can use anything the opponent throws at it, which is a really good sort of like power sort of house sort of card there. And obviously you have Mew, which does 10 damage for each number of energy attached to both depending Pokemon, and you get to with its other attack, choose an evolved Pokemon, both yours or your opponent's, and return a higher stage to their hand. This Pokemon is no longer asleep, confused, or poisoned, or anything that result in an attack. Kind of like de-evolving the opponent's Pokemon, which is good to kind of stop the likes of Vileplume. Then you have other sort of cards here. You have Professor Oak and Bill. Your draw sort of options. Yes, Bill, a draw 2 cards was good back then because drawing those 2 cards pretty much meant that you just needed those 2 cards, which is very, very strong and very, very powerful. Where the likes of Cherno, which is draw 3, is considered bad supporter. Back then, you only had quite a few, so really, really powerful. Item Finder, which is Junk Arm, Dowsing Machine, guaranteed to use any of your items as well. Obviously, you have the likes of Plus Power, which the opponent's damage you would get attached to it, they do 10 more damage. Very, very good. Nightly Garbage one, which is pretty much a recycling sort of card. Scoop Up, which is what it is. You get to scoop up a card, switch, injury removal, and injury retrieval. Very much powerful archetype with just using loads of injury removaling sort of cards, which is pretty much where this sort of format kind of like devolves into. This is exactly what a Do the Wave deck looks like, and pretty much there's no explanation needed. It is exactly what you think. You obviously have the Wigglytuff to do huge amount of damage, and Jigglypuff isn't too bad where you can just use Lullaby turn 1 to make sure the opponent's active Pokemon is asleep. Obviously, Wigglytuff also has that. The likes of Hitmonchan and Cypher are very good secondary attackers in this one, meaning they can hit for additional weaknesses, and obviously they have low energy attack costs, as well as Cypher does have free retreat, which is really good in this sort of meta game. Obviously, you have higher counts of item finance, so you can reuse your plus power to do these big one-hit KOs, like I mentioned at the start of the game. Scoop up, so you can pretty much heal any sort of damage around there. End retrieval to kind of get the energies back. Obviously, Gust of Wind is a really good gusting effect. Last has been destructive, and that's pretty much the deck. It's very simple. Loads and loads of four-offs and loads of decks. Very, very simple. And pretty much, if you want to build a deck in this era, this is definitely one I could pretty much highly recommend in this sort of meta game. I really find this very, very fascinating and very, very simple. You don't be kind of using loads of these cards from the old sort of sets. Next one is this active stall archetype. It has obviously, we've now seen lots of this Cypher, this Lickitung, this Hitmonchan. These are these lot of a Haymaker, these obviously these very low energy requirements to big sort of damage. But the first time we've seen this Magmar, where Magmar pretty much is, you have Smokescreen, which does 10 damage, and if the opponent tries to attack during your next turn, the opponent flips a coin. If tails, the attack does nothing. Yes, a really good way to absolutely disrupt the opponent by making sure they can't even attack. Very, very powerful, and kind of like chipping away bit by bit, having the likes of superior end retrieval, rocket, sneak attack, and last, so they never gain any of the setup they require. Because we're doing that, we play a higher count of build sort of option in this way, so kind of like get those extra draw cards and don't want to discard as many options around there. You'll definitely see a lot more theme with the likes of Scoop Up, Gust of Wind, End Retrieval, Computer Search, and the item cards here, because there wasn't that many of it in this pool, the pool set. So that's why they were kind of pretty much the same sort of archetypes around there. So that's why I think this is such an interesting sort of meta, because as soon as you build pretty much one deck and you can get other archetypes, you pretty much have all of the sort of meta around there. So there isn't some brand new sort of archetypes, which we can really kind of discuss in much further detail. Now let's look at this Haymaker. Haymaker, definitely, I would say, one of the most famous archetypes in there. We've seen the likes of Hitmonchan, Electrobuzz, and Cypher did in fact get a reprint in a Platinum era when they were reprinting loads of cards from the base set. We've looked at Hitmonchan, we've looked at Ditto, we've looked at Cypher, but what in fact does Electrobuzz do? Well, Electrobuzz does 10 damage and flip a coin. The opponent's active Pokemon is paralyzed. Very, very good having on a coin flip being 10 damage. Not too bad. But we also have Thunder Punch for a lightning and a colorless, 30 damage. Very, very powerful. Flip a coin. If heads, the attack does 30 plus 10 more damage. If tails, the attack does 30 and Electro does 10 damage to itself. So in theory, on a coin flip, you're doing 40 damage for 2 energies. Very, very good in this sort of meta. Remember that. Yes, you may be damaging yourself, but we have a like of Scoop Up, which can pretty much heal and that like damage sort of done. And obviously we have the Ditto, but Chansey. Chansey is a very interesting Pokemon because it has such high HP, 120, which I believe is one of the highest in this sort of metagame. And Flip a Coin if heads prevents all damage done to Chansey during the opponent's next turn, and Double Edged for 80 damage for pretty much 2 energy attachments, and it does 80 damage to itself. Pretty much it's a big clean finisher near the end of the game. And if it doesn't get KO'd in return, you have Scoop Up to pretty much pick it up in the next sort of turn. And the likes of Farfetch, which pretty much you get to do 30 damage for Pot Smash for 3 energies. Not bad, but another 30 damage for 1 energy, and Flip a Coin if heads, the attack does nothing. Either way, you can't use this attack again as long as Farfetch stays in play. Even if it is tailed, even if I put it on the bench, you won't be able to use it again. So pretty much on a coin flip, you have to get heads, and you can use for 1 energy 30 damage, which isn't bad. Kind of a payoff for like if you don't hit it, you kind of have to remove it with the Scoop Up sort of trainer card. Also really powerful archetype you've seen, but it's the first time we have seen Imposter Oak's Revenge. And this pretty much is a discard a card from your hand in order to play this card, and the opponent shuffles their hand and draw 4 cards. Really, really powerful when you have the likes of Lass in this one. So you can kind of like, you shuffle it into it, team up with Lass, and pretty much making sure they can't really get that setup they require. You may also notice in a load of these lists, they have very high counts of basic energy, because back then you're in a much slower format. There's no like the likes of where we've looked at other ones where you've got Dynamotor, your Blast Moves, which can flood the board state with energies, even putting damage counters on or not. Here we have the likes of just doing slowly attach, and then obviously double colors really helps in this sort of meta game. So that's exactly why this deck, you play a high count of energies, you play a high count of trainer cards to really help in this sort of meta game. Next one here is this Magmar Hitmonchan. Exactly what we've seen in loads of other sort of archetypes as well. High counts of Magmar, try and make sure the opponent can't attack. Whilst you're doing that, you kind of get your setup with your Hitmonchan. Your chances can do those big finishing games at the end, and Scoop Up so you're constantly using any of your cards. Not playing any disruptive cards like obviously Rocket Sneak Attack or Last. focusing more on energy disruptive cards with superior energy retrieval, and item fire still constantly reusing any of the items around there. Again, you're kind of seeing there isn't too much really talk about these sort of decks, because a load of them are very similar to what we've mentioned before. Wigglytuff Challenge, however, is a bit different. We obviously have the likes of Do the Wave, which is a really good effect. We have Mewtwo, which immediately energy accelerates it to do pretty much powerful get these effects on there. But we have this thing called Challenge, which is exactly why it's called Wigglytuff Challenge, where you ask your opponent if they accept a challenge. If the opponent declines, draw 2 cards. If your opponent accepts, each of you search your deck for any number of basic Pokemon cards and put them face down on the bench. When you both have finished, shuffle your deck and turn those cards face up. Pretty much, it's a really interesting sort of effect where your opponent you play this challenge card, and the opponent, you either get to draw 2 cards, or you get to pretty much like flood your board with the energy, the Pokemon you have in there. So it's a really good double-edged sword. It's very much a powerful Wigglytuff sort of effect. And having the likes of Item Finder, Rocket Sneak Attack, and stuff like that, you can be disruptive. You can constantly be reusing this sort of challenge archetype. But we also have the likes of Mr. Mime, which has the invisible wall Pokepower, where whenever an attack does 30 or more damage to Mr. Mime, prevent that damage. It's a very good kind of like protector sort of thing if it does more damage, and does 10 plus 10 more damage for each damage counter on the defending Pokemon. Really good, kind of like a finishing off sort of game. You can hit with Wigglytuff, kind of like power up your Mr. Mime on the bench, and then kind of get those big sort of attacks in the late game. Really interesting archetype. I think Wigglytuff Challenge is probably now become a bit more my favorite one, because you have that weird like synergy of a challenge where you like challenge your opponent from to like use anything. So I find that such a fascinating archetype. We don't really see much like these interactive sort of cards where your opponent during the turn, except like the disruptive archetypes. So it's definitely something which I find is absolutely interesting. So kind of like rounding up with this, I want to talk to you about what makes this format so good. And having a look at Jason Galaxy's blog, which is where quite a lot of the information does come from, it says a really interesting quote from there, which I kind of thought I would talk to you about. Though Team Rocket contains only a few playable cards, though it did contain permanently altered the way the game was played. Game less frequently became draw-out tactic battles, and more often became top deck contests decided by how a player would draw in their first few turns. Why is this so important? Well, because of the likes of Rocket Sneak Attack, Lass, and also the likes of the Vileplume deck, this is very much the disruptive archetypes which have kind of become known fashion in the Pokemon trading card game. This is why this archetype is kind of gone around, and this is where Control really stepped forward to it. Luckily, Control never really got in these top 8 sort of positions, but I think this showcasing those top 8 decks really kind of gives that outline exactly what this format was. And if we just look here, he made a really interesting thing, which pretty much said it is a good sort of format. And we look at this sort of way here. It's very easy to learn. It's very quite affordable, as there aren't these big sort of cards there. Yes, there obviously are first edition, which is going to be very expensive. But if you're not going with first edition, it's very easy to pick up all of these sort of cards. And it has a decent fun level by being 3 out of 5 and quite popular as well. So definitely out of the basic archetypes, I thought this would be the most fun to like kind of showcase. We have the Neo format, and Gym Challenge, which kind of is interesting. Neo obviously introduced the first rotation, but then Gym Challenge is kind of like labeled even by Jessica Krasinski as one of the least fun events, like formats to really play in. So I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of showcase exactly why this format is played and enjoyed about it. And this absolutely outlines it, which I really enjoy. So I thought I'd just finish off by looking at more of these key cards and some ugly decks, which I didn't even mention. Obviously, we looked at Lickitung, which was definitely a really good like coin flips to kind of like either paralyze or confuse the opponent's Pokemon. But we have Moltres here, where Mill was kind of a bit okay in this sort of metagame. We had Wildflower, which you get to discard any number of fire energies attached to Moltres. And for each one you discard the top card of your opponent's deck. You discard 4. You discard top 4 cards of your opponent's deck. This is very, very good because you can just constantly kind of like get rid of as many of their cards as much as play. And Mill did have a kind of okay in there because they have the likes of Lickitung making sure that they're paralyzed, they can't move from the active spot, and chipping away there. Then Wildflower do those big discarding in the late game. Blastoise as well. Rain Dance, the first ever one. The first one which is kind of brought up to the Baxcalibur we're seeing now in Xian Pao. And obviously Blastoise EX and Blastoise as well. This is the 3rd video I have done where we've covered Blastoise's ability. It kind of shows how powerful it is, and it still should be mentioned every single one of these different archetypes, because attaching any number of water energies from your hand to your Pokemon in play is very, very powerful. And the likes of Articuno you did have, but Hydro Pump is also really good. doing 40 plus 10 more for each water energy attached to Blastoise, but obviously do not pay the energy cost. The extra water energy after the second doesn't count. Very interesting sort of archetype here. And then we have Clefable. I really like this card because of the Metronome. We get to choose one of the defending Pokemon's attack. Metronome copies that attack except for its energy cost and everything required in order to do that attack. No matter what type of defending Pokemon is, Clefable's type is still colorless. I really like this one because you can just copy one of your opponent's attacks and obviously have minimized where all damage is reduced by 20 in the next turn, effectively giving it 90 HP. Very interesting sort of these Pokemon cards here, which did see quite a lot of competitive play during this sort of time and loads of the other archetypes. And finish off with the key sort of cards here. Item Finder, Gust of Wind, Professor's Oak. These are cards which we've seen multiple times and kind of seen loads of iteration. Bill, the only time I would ever see draw two in like a competitive card type was when Vileplume had also had that trainer lock, the item lock as well there. So Bill being a really, really strong archetype in this one, with constantly just getting to draw two, is really good in this sort of format. Gust of Wind is amazing. I think it's one of the best on gusting effect. Obviously translates it into Pokemon Capture and then obviously into Boss's Orders where we have now today. And Item Finder, as a huge fan of Junkarm, was a huge fan of Dowsing Machine. Obviously we tie everything back to Item Finder. And that's exactly why I think this is such an interesting card as well. And I hope this has kind of been a bit helpful, kind of looking into a base set to Team Rocket. It definitely is very surprising to see how different this format has kind of evolved and kind of how much we oversaw archetypes into how we play today, how Control, how Item Lock, and more importantly, how most of the key sort of cards we play, like the trainer cards, have really translated into where we are to nowadays. I hope this has been helpful. If you have enjoyed this video, please remember to like, subscribe, and don't forget to join the channel. It really helps a lot, and you really have a huge impact to see exactly what archetypes I should be covering in next sort of topics. I'll be back next week, obviously talking about another retro sort of format, and then obviously in the next couple of days for some more videos. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys soon. Bye for now.